Hello world! Curses of madness be upon you all, my friends. I am Euclidean Vision, the emotional support, here today with my first set of units for my final Overwatch 2 PvE Faction, the International Justice Commission. If you have no idea who the IJC are, don't worry, neither did I until recently really, so I've made a video giving context for who they are, why they'd been mobilizing in Overwatch 2, and how they would construct a strike force. And so I'd advise you to go check that out first if you haven't seen it, because I don't really want to have to go through all that again. And if you have seen it, welcome back, you handsome devil. You should now understand why I'm just going to jump straight into my unit ideas for the first division of the IJC, Helix Security International. Now, as stated in that video, I've given Helix a sort of search and rescue theming alongside their more security-driven forces to give them a strong focus in aerial mobility and damage. Which leads me straight into their grunt units. I think each of the divisions of the IJC, based on each of these corporations and groups, they should all have at least their own basic grunt unit with their own distinct differences and advantages. And with Helix Security, I can see their forces working more particularly like Soldier 76, using an assault rifle with an underslung rocket launcher, rockets obviously being very key to Helix's whole shtick. But I think you could also give them either Soldier 76's sprint ability and not the biotic field, but you could also maybe give them something like Baptiste's boost jump to fit in with Helix's rocket-powered mobility suits. Which we'll jump straight into now with the Helix Raptora units, which are going to be basically just an analogue of Pharah, your standard rocket launcher, the Raptora suit for rocket boosts and for hovering. And it then depends if you want to sort of just leave that there and keep them as quite simple units, or if you want to improve them over time as you go up difficulty levels, say, giving them more use out of the suit missiles, whether that's a bombing run, or sort of like a burst missile dash, or like a sidewinder sort of attack. The Raptora units are going to be quite basic, but you could always improve them with elements of Pharah's talent tree, for example. That would remain to be seen there. And so if the Helix Raptora unit is an analogue for Pharah, then we're going to look at an analogue more so of something like Echo with the Helix Riptora unit, which would be another flying unit, but one that doesn't use rockets to fly, but relies on a set of vibrating wings in order to hover off the ground. These wings, vibrating almost like chainsaws, would then be used for melee attacks, whether those are spins or dives or slices, or exactly how you execute on the mobility would probably come down to the distinct visual design that you end up with for these. But I think that a very particular technique that you could give to these units would be for them to vibrate the wings to create a heat zone, almost like how bees generate heat by vibrating their wings. You could also then use this as their sort of base ranged attack by giving them some sort of shockwave attack similar to maybe Lucio. But now to go back to rockets again, the Helix Afterburner, which is going to be heavily focused in the rockets almost as their primary weapon, giving them the ability to leave a flaming area on the ground when they take off into the sky, or to use their rockets from above to singe the ground at their feet. You could also have them shooting fireballs, or leaving flame trails behind as they fly at you at high speeds, giving them some more sort of horizontal mobility compared to most of the rest of the Helix units, and ultimately its primary weapon would probably be just a flamethrower, whether it's able to, as I said, use this from above via the rockets, or on a horizontal plane when, say, on the ground. And then to stick with the sort of elemental theme, the Helix Thunderbird, which would be a unit that, again, is able to fly, but this time, again, not through rockets, using electromagnetism, this unit particularly using electricity to hold itself off the ground distinctly. You'll see why when I come to another unit shortly. And this sort of electric suit allows them to manipulate electricity, dropping lightning bursts from the sky to deal AoE damage, leaving electro ball mines lying around the place. And you could give this unit sort of a variety of different weapons, whether that's a Tesla cannon, or some sort of energy orb, or a weapon that sticks out particularly to me as fitting this unit would be something like Apex Legends' Triple Take, making this Helix's sort of semi-kind of sniper unit, if you will. But to keep up that sort of elemental theme, we're going to move on to the next unit here, the Helix Cyclone, which again is a unit using a flying suit, but this one uses propeller blades to allow them to hover on pockets of air. These propeller blades are also going to tie into their main attacks as well, allowing them to execute sonic booms, potentially some sort of like reflective tornado, manipulating the wind around them to bounce your projectiles back at them, or they could obviously use that to knock themselves higher into the air. You could maybe even have them creating like a pressure dome that slows anything underneath it, and as like a real primary attack, I think whenever they're grounded they should be able to shoot out their two propellers from their suit as almost like boomerang blades. And unsurprisingly, I am not done with elemental units yet, as we move on to the Helix Operative, who's a unit that again has a flying suit, but this one is a pressure jet suit, using highly pressurized water to launch them off the ground, and a condensed water cannon as their primary weapon. This is a unit that I can see working kind of like May in a fashion, in that they have a sort of rapid fire projectile beam as their main weapon, but the water obviously won't freeze you, but I think that it should deal knockback with every hit. So this would be kind of almost like an annoying sort of area denial tanking kind of unit, but it might be able to do a lot of CC from range with this ranged water cannon. Or you could also give it a giant water boop that completely empties its tank and deals more knockback based on how much ammo it had left at the time, as sort of like an alt fire, if you will. And this also would tie into what I think is my only Helix support unit, in that the water cannon can be adapted to work as a healing spray for its own units. And so to keep up the suit thing, and to finally not have a flying unit or a unit with any sort of aerial mobility, the Helix Excavator, which is a unit that I see using like a pair of sort of half conical hand drills that it can condense together to burrow into the ground and jump up, or to churn the earth in front of it to create temporary cover. You could also call them sort of like shovels, so it has different styles of attacks when it has two separate weapons, almost like the Beast Claw from Bloodborne, and when it combines the two hands together into the drill, it has a different set of attacks. And you could even possibly take that up to something like a drilling laser, or like a charge rifle sort of attack, where it almost has like a feint where it looks like it's going to do a drill attack, putting the two arms together in front of itself, but then opens up the drill to fire a laser beam at you from a distance. And the only sort of other thing I can think of with the Helix Excavator is a technique that it would purely use when it goes underground, would be burying sort of like a depth charge. And this is where my sort of search and rescue thing sort of comes back in again. It's sort of cropped up through elements of units thus far, but this is one that I can see with the Excavator being used to clear debris and rescue people from sort of underground situations. But of course, as a security unit, it could also be for burying people underground and blowing them up so that nobody finds them ever again. That's definitely secure. Moving on to a unit, much more concerned with security in this case, the Helix Magneticist, who I've got being able to work in one of two ways. I've got my very general magnetism unit idea that I apply: Defense Matrix, Deflect, Kinetic Grasp, Bioshock's Return to Sender Vigor, things like Zarya Bubbles. I usually apply those techniques to any kind of magnetic unit. I have various magnetic units throughout my existing unit concept so far. There are one or two coming up in further videos for the IJC, but I've been trying to make them all distinct or different. So there's one coming up for Oasis in like my final video, which is very particularly different and works in a very particular way compared to all my other ones thus far. So I tried to then think of how to make the Magneticist for Helix work a bit differently. Like, to me it makes sense from either a security or a search and rescue sort of idea to have someone using magnetic gloves either for holding criminals in place or for rescuing people out of, say, collapsed buildings, things like that. And then I thought back to one of my Null Sector units, which was a pair of Omnics that had opposing magnetic charges. And so the Helix Magneticist, my sort of second iteration, my particular iteration, is one that I would have planting particular magnetic charges and using those to enact its own particular attacks. This is a unit that would have to sort of build up to its ultimate power by laying sort of particular charges and then charging itself, or say you as the player, with a different or a similar magnetic charge. Obviously, as with most of these other suit characters for Helix, this is what allows them to float by planting, say, a positive charge in a few places across the ground and then enacting a positive charge on themselves, allowing them to fly. but they could also say attach a negative charge to you as the player, and then you wouldn't be able to step in any negative zone, but you would also then be pulled to and almost rooted in any positive zone. And so in thinking about it that way, the Magneticist does feel much more like a security unit in the hands of Helix Security here. And so to round off my sort of Helix suit characters, like anyone who like the Raptora suits, the Riptora suits, the Afterburner, the Thunderbird, the Cyclone, the Operative, the Excavator, and the Magneticist, they will all sort of accumulate in this one special, almost like a mini-boss unit that I've come up with that I call the Helix Steel Wing, which is almost like a commander unit that's a special version that can change suits when the initial suit is broken. When you kill this unit, when you knock it out of the sky, it won't actually die, it will go down into something like a baby form that then runs around and then gets a new suit dropped in. Think like the end of Iron Man 3, where he's controlling like 100 different Iron Man suits and is able to jump in and out of each one at will, and each one does a slightly different thing, yada yada. The Helix Steel Wing would then start as a Raptora unit, as a very simple unit, but once it's killed, we'll go to baby form, and when in baby form, I think that you could have that sort of commander sort of idea in that any nearby sort of base grunt units, mainly particularly Helix grunt units, the security forces, they would all sort of gather around the Steel Wing to protect them and could get their own sort of stat buffs in that situation as well. They could maybe even, the more grunts that are gathered around the Steel Wing, the quicker the new suit is airdropped to them. Something like that. They could even have like a special mobility, escape, or attack when the new suit is dropped in, and it could be different for each suit, and yada yada. That could be a really expansive unit when it's a unit that's like 8 other units or something like that, I'm not sure. So I'm going to move away from the suit-based units onto just a few final ones that I've come to for Helix that fit, again, both with their sort of security ideas and with this sort of search and rescue theming that I've come to. Which leads me on to a unit that I think you might see a few more units through the IJC replicate to a degree, is the Helix Jailer, who is a controller with drones, which is again a unit idea that I've used, but in a different context. And here it'll work with the controller directing drones to link chains to you as like a jailer. And these chain links would limit your movement for each one attached to you, but the particularity of this unit is that the chain link links you to a moving drone that can be destroyed, or that has its own ability to fire at you or drain your health. The drones could do various things while linked to you, but they'd obviously be weaker in context than some of the other sort of chain link abilities that you'll see as we come through the further videos. And just to stick with the sort of mobility sort of aspect of Helix as a whole, the controller itself, the drone controller, could have the drones attached to them and lift them to high ground to escape if you manage to get past the drones and threaten the controller. So again, giving a sort of different spin on the controller and element thing from my two sort of barrier wielders from the Junkers and Null Sector respectively. And as you'll see with this next unit, this again has some similarities to the Jailer, but it'll execute on them in different ways. The Helix Surveyor, who's going to be like a cyborg with a giant grapple hand. There's a fighter from Marvel vs. Capcom who uses it. I don't know what original game they're from. But a way I've thought of extending that character idea is to also have their fingers be able to extend into further ropes like a net as well. So this Helix Surveyor would be able to grapple to high places, swing along maybe to kick you in the face, sort of like a mini wrecking ball, but it would also be able to climb up there like Widowmaker. You could have them do sort of a Roadhog Doomfist combo in that the hand reaches out, grabs you, pulls you in, and then punches you back. So it's sort of like a multi-CC, which I know so many people are going to hate. You could also then have them shoot their hand off to disable you in one of two ways. Like if they catch you in a net and wrap your arms up, you're disabled, but you can move, so you won't be able to attack or use your abilities, but you can move, as I say. Or they'd shoot them at your legs, which would immobilize you, making you immobile, unable to move, but obviously still able to use your abilities. And another sort of like cheeky one you could throw in there would be some sort of like knockback whip shot a la Brigitte. But when using any of these sort of extending hand attacks, you could maybe have the Surveyor lose their hand as they're mainly dealing with like rope. Although maybe if they lose the hand, they could then gain sort of like a rope blaster that manages to net or snare you no matter when they shoot at you, so it's actually seemingly initially a detriment, but then it turns into a benefit. And maybe there could be an extra element to that where if you're able to defeat the Surveyor without them shooting their hand off at you in any of the various ways they can, you then get the hand as a pickup, which could also have like a random aspect to it, that maybe when you pick it up there's a roll of the dice that determines whether it's a grapple, a hook, a whip shot, or you could make it become various things, and then it would depend on what you've ended up with as to which member of your team you'd want to sort of have pick that up, things like that. That could make the pickups themselves a bit more interesting, adding a bit of randomness to them based on the origin of the pickup itself. And so, finally, on to my final Helix Security unit for this video. The Helix Saboteur is a unit that is largely based around just being frustrating. It's not going to do any damage on its own, it's just going to be an utter little shit. The Helix Saboteur I see always entering the fray from like a suspension wire, like Mission Impossible, and it never actually touches the floor, so again, with all of Helix, it's kind of got aerial mobility. I'm kind of taking the piss with this unit a little, but its primary ability would be to drop a chaff field. And if any of you have played the Metal Gear Solid games, the function of chaff that I would sort of translate into Overwatch would be an area within which you're not able to use your abilities. Sort of like Sombra's hack, but different in that as soon as you step out of the chaff field, your abilities are immediately back. But say you Reinhardt charge into the field, that will get cancelled as soon as you hit the field. But as soon as you then walk past the field, you can put your barrier up and stuff again. It would be a sort of more sort of situationally dependent Sombra hack, if that makes any sense. But I think you could take this one step further and have them work almost like the scientist from the map 5 in Call of Duty Zombies, where there was a scientist that once you got onto a certain part of the map, they would chase after you, and if they managed to physically grab you, they would steal one of your 2 guns, and you had to then chase them down and shoot them, hit them, kill them to get that second gun back. And I think a really fun way to translate that into Overwatch would be to have them drop from the ceiling, grab onto you, lift you off the floor for a second, you struggle free. I think that having a button interaction to struggle free from things like the Assassin from the Saboteur would be really useful. And once you have broken free, you will realise that either your gun has been stolen or one of your abilities has been stolen, and you can't get it back until the Saboteur has been killed. And admittedly, that's a unit idea, or at least some sort of mechanic that I really think you could apply to some of my other factions. Maybe there's a unit sort of concept that you think would fit this better, like a Null Sector unit, for instance, could work far better stealing abilities, but then you could also have a Talon unit that's better with a chaff field. For instance, like a chaff field wouldn't make much sense for a Null Sector unit to step into because it would just fuck them up immediately. So, just to make that point clear, that was not my final unit. Trust me to finish doing the recording for this video and then suddenly sit down and come up with a whole bunch of other ideas. In going through the IJC as a whole, I ended up adding sort of like boss characters to each of the subdivisions of the IJC, and I also came up with 1 or 2 sort of just extra units in my sort of little brainstorming session. My one particular actual Helix unit is another one that doesn't use a flying suit, but this is my actual answer to the Talon Sniper in Helix's forces, a unit I call the Helix Watcher, which uses a lock-on guided missile launcher, very much like the Nikita launcher from Metal Gear Solid, and working in a similar fashion to the Sniper as it exists now, needing line of sight and a duration of time to lock onto you, but the lock-on, once it's on with the Helix Watcher, won't go away, and it will be able to shoot the rocket at you no matter where you go. And theoretically, with this idea, the missile, rocket, whatever, will be able to travel round cover. It is a guided rocket. But obviously you can then use this, moving at the right time, to make it crash into cover, or you could even turn it all the way around and send it back at the Helix Watcher themselves. A final little thing for the Watcher, to give them some form of mobility, I think that this is the unit you'd probably give Pharah's Concussive Blast, the boop rocket, to, so it can bounce itself up to high ground, as is useful for any kind of sniper unit, but also gives it a little bit of CC or the ability to escape a dive if necessary. You could maybe have them hold on to a guided missile by the tail to like lift them slowly up to high ground, but that's a little just dumb. But it could also turn into a very particular attack where they suddenly drop back to the ground and let the missile fly at you, or you can shoot the missile at the time to blow them up. It's like a little extra method to get some sneaky damage in. You could play with that in a number of ways, I think. That was my only actual unit idea, but I feel it has a really strong sort of gameplay loop to base off. But now we're going to quickly touch on some of these boss characters that I've come to for Helix. And the first one has come to us because I just totally forgot about making a Recluse mention. If you were to use a Recluse iteration for Helix, this would produce a boss character I call the Helix Judiciary. And not so much looking at the mechanics of this either, like take whatever ideas you have for Recluse and stick them in this idea, but this one sort of comes to me more from a character standpoint, in that you can make the Recluse character a very particular element of the world, in that either they are a reformed criminal who used to be imprisoned by Helix and has now been sort of brought under their employ in order to catch other criminals, or you could have it that they are still like a disgraced convict, but one that Helix puts to work defending sort of highly important individuals. So whether she was maybe one of the guards of Doomfist while he was imprisoned by Helix Security, or maybe she had been assigned to protect Anubis following mission statement, but maybe before Valkyrie. If Talon have stolen Anubis in Valkyrie, then that would give the character some motivation to push forward into the world more and join up with Helix. This may not sort of result in an actual hero, but I think there's enough there on sort of a character basis to add that sort of element of character to some of the PvE units that we come across. And then finally, I had done a lot of diving into Slavic mythology for my Volskaya video coming up, and then sort of just kind of ignored all the ridiculous Egyptian mythology that there is that you could tie to Helix. Like, Helix aren't determinately an Egyptian company, as far as I know, but a lot of their core activity seems to be displayed in Egypt. And things like their Raptora suits definitely seem to take from sort of the Egyptian imagery to an extent. But for my Egyptian mythology boss characters, you could obviously have like a physical representation of Anubis that raises the dead nearby by linking to it by wires, and you've then got sort of a balance of fighting the Resurrector and the Resurrected, and it could potentially just resurrect things indefinitely, so that's like a really prolonged sort of balancing act boss fight to go for. Whether that would actually be Anubis or just a unit that has been inspired by the thing that they were protecting for Helix, that's up for debate there. Make the character however you want. Then you'd be looking at something like a crocodile mech, like an aquatic crocodile mech, something like that you could give like a death roll grab, or you could give it the ability to like make like a flash flood that will, say, put water from ground level up to, say, waist level of any hero across the entire map, which means you can still use high ground to escape the water. But then in the water, the Croco-Mech has, say, like stealth or extra speed, or the ability to do a particular sneak attack like the death roll. And you could obviously look to, I think it's Horizon Zero Dawn has like a particular Croco boy that you could really take some influence for that sort of fight. You could sort of go like completely the other way and have like an Omnic Sphinx Riddler. So if you wanted to break up the sort of combat feel, you could introduce like an Omnic Sphinx that actually tasks the players with riddles. That could be kind of fun for just something different. Then thinking about sort of the eagle imagery, could you have like a cyber eagler, someone who uses like robot eagles to dive at you out of the sky, drop bombs, pick up enemies and throw them at you, or bring them back to defend the handler. If there's multiple birds, you could have all the birds grab one of your characters and lift them up into the sky and drop them the other side of the map, something silly like that. And you could maybe have them shooting off like metal feathers as projectile attacks. You could then look at a final animalistic example from Egyptian mythology and make sort of like a dung beetle mech or a tank or like a weapons platform that units will stand on top of, and it'll run around so they can shoot at you. But if you make it into like a mech or a tank, I think you could then really make it distinct in its attack patterns by having it gather up and disturb the earth on the map that you're on, sort of creating new elements of terrain, but it will ground all of these up into a big dung ball or a big earth ball that it can then roll around to squash you, or roll along the floor to knock you back, or to then turn it back into mud to like root you in place. You can play with a few things with the dung beetle. So, with those gratuitous additions out of the way, those are all of my units for Helix Security International as part of the International Justice Commission. As you can see with all of these, a lot of these unit ideas might sort of bleed into each other a little, and they can be a little loose at times, but that's because we're trying to just sort of go for theming and sort of expand the collection of concepts for the world. The IJC that I've designed here is a massive faction, and so as long as each unit ends up relatively distinct in some way, I don't really mind if there's like a crossover of abilities. It's better than them all just dealing damage. So with that, hopefully you've enjoyed my first part of the IJC, which details Helix Securities units for that group. And it would really help if you did enjoy, because there's another 5 of these coming as I cover my further corporations and groups that have contributed to the IJC, with my next video being focused on the Vishkar Corporation. Thank you again for staying with me to this point, friends. Please do all the YouTube things, like come chat with me in the comments about this idea, about how it all works together, about what we could do to make Overwatch 2 more fun, and hopefully Blizzard will actually listen to us eventually. But with that, I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Take care of yourselves out there, teammates, and may the glorious light of justice rain down upon you. Bye-bye.